My guest today is Josh Scott, a swimmer turned into an entrepreneur and investor. Josh runs a holding company of swimming school businesses, SwimSRQ and Swim Academy. Thanks a lot for coming to the HoldCo Builders podcast, Josh.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
While I was doing some research, size of the business today, seven-figure in revenue, 5 locations swim school with margins between 30 and 35%, and
Correct.
200 kids per location. It all started from somewhere. Tell me more about the early days and when you saw that you're more interested in the business side and not so much about the coaching side.
Totally. Well, to take a step back, my wife and I were both swimmers our entire life. We had a really good, college swimming career. I swam at Syracuse University. My wife swam at Cal Berkeley. I joke that my wife is the talented swimmer in the family. She was actually very, very elite at a national level. And I owned a swim. We both coached. We actually met coaching swimming in California. That evolved into owning a swim team and swim school in California. And then we made a decision to move to Florida in 2016. The school that we owned in California was more geared towards competitive swimmers. So more of the kids that wanted college scholarships, were training, going to Olympic trials, things like that. We did have a small lesson component, but when we moved, we thought we were done with swimming. But swimming is one of those things very hard to get away from when you're in the lifestyle. And we got to Sarasota, Florida, so moved across country where my wife is from, and looked around, and there weren't really many satisfactory options in the market. So we decided to start our own swim school in 2018. It was very small. Didn't know if it would work. Just literally rented one lane and an outdoor pool. Had about 20 to 30 clients from my wife's reputation when she was a swimmer in the area. Her friends and teammates were having kids, and they wanted us to coach them, and then it just kind of blew up from there. So at the time, there wasn't much competition other than the YMCA, and we were able to leverage that to really build a brand and kind of see where it took us. But we really, it's kind of funny because I don't really know if we had a particular plan in place. We just saw an opportunity and started to kind of do it as really more or less a side hustle, and then understood that this is actually an industry. This is a good business. This can be a large business, and just kind of ran with it.
What about the coaching side? Why I'm asking is I have some friends who moved from my school after graduating high school. They went to and study in school in United States, and there's a great scholarship. And I heard some of the numbers of the salaries of the coaches. They weren't in the best schools, but one guy once he won the NCAA in decathlon. I think it was like 10, 11 years ago. Today he's an Olympic athlete. His coach got some, I don't know, salary went from maybe 60K to, I heard some numbers, to 3, 4, 500K because of his student being so successful. And he started getting so many offers from different universities to come here pretty much to teach our students. So what were your thoughts maybe of going this route instead of becoming an entrepreneur? Or did you even think about this or consider?
Yeah, you can do very well being a college coach, but frankly, there aren't many of those jobs. And there are the people that have worked their way up to making, 300 grand a year. But there's really not much money in swim coaching. I mean, it was rare on the club side. If you're making six figures as a swim coach, you're doing quite well. That's kind of what I realized before all of this started. I actually coached at a very high level, and, we had a lot of success. We were a top 5 team in the country for 18 and under kids, but really wasn't making any money. And I actually took a job as an aquatic director and head coach of a summer league team, ran the lesson program, ran the clinics, and was making about 2 to 3 times as much money. So there was a lot more money outside of elite coaching. But that being said, at the top level, there's definitely money, but you definitely have to put in the time and years and have the right athletes to get there. So a lot of the coaches, some coaches are making, between 200 and 300 grand, and they can make extra money from clinics and camps. But those jobs, at the top 10 universities in the country aren't that easy to get. And to be honest with you, the lifestyle, it's tough to be an elite coach. It's tough to be an elite athlete. I'm a family guy. I have 3 kids, and my lifestyle right now is excellent compared to what I was doing when I was coaching. So the money can be there, but I wouldn't trade this for the world right now as far as being able to be with my kids and spend time with my family and the time that I have in the place that I live. Because a lot of times too, you have to go where the jobs are. You can't necessarily be where you want to be with family. So we have a pretty good setup here.
So how long it took for you and your wife to go all in pretty much on this, or full time? You rented this one line, you had 20 to 30 clients. How quickly did it grow from there, and what was the next step?
Yeah, so we started summer of 18, and by summer of 19, we knew we had something. There were some specific issues with the pool. They were actually kicking out all the tenants to do a development project that never happened. So we were actually forced to find a new pool, but it did help us grow. We actually refurbished an old pool that's now our headquarters that was left for dead. It was black. We literally saved turtles from the pool when we were putting in new mechanicals and draining it and cleaning it up. So we actually did that prior to COVID. And that was, so to answer your question, about a year in, we knew we had something. It was just a matter of finding the right facility. And that'll be like a common theme when we talk about this. It really comes down to pools and people. It's really a simple business if you have the right framework and know what you're doing. The challenging part is the actual pool to operate in, because it's not as easy as starting a CrossFit gym as far as like finding a warehouse space and just setting up shop. There's a lot that goes into it. So our model has been the hosted model, using pools that already exist. Sometimes that's partnering with gyms. Sometimes that's refurbishing a pool like we did. But to get back and kind of weave back into your story, we knew we had something the summer of 19, right when we found out we lost our pool. So we put a lot of money into refurbishing the pool that we're in, one of the pools that we're in now, only to have it back up against COVID and not be able to open. So we were supposed to open January 2020. Construction, things like that got delayed. We were supposed to open March 2020. And then, of course, COVID happened, and we couldn't open for 2 or 3 more months. Luckily, we're in Florida. Florida businesses were able to get back in the swing of things. So that was probably the most stressful moment of my life, when literally all of our savings were tied up in this pool and we couldn't make money. We couldn't operate. So luckily we were able to open by like late May of that year. And we actually grew during COVID. I think we were the only swim school to grow during 2020. But it was a good bounce back. People wanted things to do with their kids. Luckily, the pool was outdoors and people felt comfortable being outdoors with the chlorinated water. And then from that point, we were able to grow and take on additional pools and kind of continue on our journey. But that was a really big point about a year and a half in, kind of on that cusp of, hey, is this business actually going to work? And okay, it's going to work. How big can this be? So we knew that there was the market for it. And it was kind of an, if you build it, they will come type thing. We just needed the facility, and we needed something that could handle the amount of volume we knew we could do.
So the first business was SwimSRQ, or it was a Swim Academy. What is the difference between those two?
It's a good question. So, and it kind of goes back to not planning when we named it. SwimSRQ was the first business in our main business. SRQ is the airport code for Sarasota, Florida. So that means a lot locally, but if you're not from this area, you wouldn't know what that means. So after the last podcast that we were talking about, I got a lot of people reaching out like, what a great name that is. And it is a great name locally, but when we expanded to the Tampa area, that name doesn't travel well. So I learned from the error of my ways and just wanted a generic name that could be taken anywhere. That way it would give us the flexibility to grow, throughout Florida, other states. So it's just generic Swim Academy. And maybe it's not the best name, but it works wherever you go. And there are a lot of bad names in the swim school industry. I don't think it really matters as long as you have the right product and do a good job with what you do. So everybody knows what it is. Everybody knows what we do. And it was basically a way to expand and get out of Sarasota, because the name SwimSRQ would not travel well. So as it stands now, we have 4 locations in Sarasota, Lakewood Ranch, Florida, cover the entire area of Sarasota, Manatee County. And we have 1 location in Palm Harbor, Florida, which is northwest of Tampa.
And when you opened the first, the one you opened in May 2020, was it just you and your wife who were coaching, or you already had to do some hires, or how quickly did it grow?
We had already gone through the journey of really learning the swim school business, because one thing I underestimated when I started this was how different learn to swim is in the swim school business versus actual coaching. And I learned that to a lesser extent in California when I started my swim team, when I just kind of assumed if I put a bunch of great coaches together, the lesson business would thrive. But the reality is the parent of a 2, 3, 4-year-old doesn't necessarily care how many Olympians you've coached. They just want their kid water safe, and they want them to learn how to swim. So we had a really good foundation. We had to learn how to teach the kids under 3. We actually hired a swim school from New York to come train us in what we call parent and me with, kids under 3, because that was completely new to my wife and I. We had a great instructor that really had experience in that and spearheaded that program. And we were able to kind of train as we go. We're very good, my wife and I, at the actual competitive strokes, but we had a lot to learn about the curriculum aspect for literally 5 months and up. So we teach 5-month-olds, and that was foreign to us. So we had to hire the right people and get the right training for them to really develop our curriculum and our methodology. So that had already been basically figured out. I mean, we're always tweaking, we're always trying to do better, but the foundation had already been laid by the time we were going to the new pool. So we had a great instructor for kids under 3. We had some great ex-collegiate athletes to coach kind of the 3 and up crowd. So we had a really solid staff of probably about 5 instructors. And we were able to kind of build on that from there. And now we basically have about 30 instructors between all 5 locations. And we've really been able to keep a good culture and hire the right people. And that's kind of one of the things that makes us different is who we hire. We hire aquatic people. This is nobody's first job with us. So we don't necessarily take people and train them ground up like a lot of franchises do. We look to pay more and hire great people and kind of merge their experience with our methodology. So we're not really trying to force them into you're doing this for 5 minutes, this for 5 minutes, this for 5 minutes. We have a very clear path about the goals in each group, but we want the instructor to identify with the child and meet them where they're at and use the tools in their tool belt to have the most effective lesson experience possible.
And how quickly did you go from one location to 2 to 3 to 4 and to 5 you have today?
Yeah, so we about a year in, we were able, maybe 10 months in, we were able to secure the initial pool was outdoor, and the one we switched for that was outdoor. We were actually able to secure a partnership with a local gym, which has been a great partnership. They're owned by the hospital, and they have an indoor pool. So they have a nice therapy pool where we teach the kids 3 and under. It's 92 degrees. Beautiful experience. And they have a 6-lane lap pool that we teach our 3 and up kids out of. So about probably 10 months in, we had that relationship. And then about a year after that, we secured a partnership with a national gym chain that works with swim schools and has a lot of the franchise swim schools in them. But we were able to open that location about another year after that. So we probably had 3 locations by about 2 years in. And then from that point, we held with 3 locations for a while. Then we chose to expand to Palm Harbor about 3.5 years in. And then we were able to actually buy a property. So we own one of our locations. We were able to buy that about a year ago. So call that 5 years in. Now with that, that's kind of the solid framework. We have started pools and lost pools. So in this business, I move fast if there's opportunity. Through the last several years, there's been a lot of growth in Florida. So we've been there to capitalize on that. We've had other pools, but with our business, a lot of times people don't understand what they're getting into as far as the kids running around. So we had a very nice assisted living facility in Tampa that was doing quite well. Beautiful pool. It was actually the most beautiful pool in our portfolio. Really good rental rate. And had a really good relationship with the general manager, but the general manager left and the new general manager didn't want us. So we were only there about a year and had to cease operations. We partnered with a country club about 30 minutes south of where we're at now in a place called Venice, Florida. And I've never seen anything like it. It was the fastest I was ever able to grow anything. We had about 85 to 100 kids less than a month in. But some of the lap swimmers that were used to swimming Saturday morning complained, and they kicked us out of there. They were done with it. So that's kind of shaped how I've approached the business, where just solidifying leases, because a lot of times it's great if you can get into these pools with not much money, and that's kind of how we built. But at the same time, we're at the point now where we want stability. So we're not going to go through the process of marketing a new location, putting the resources and advertising, instructors, and all that if we don't know we can keep it for a while. So there's been a lot of that over the years. The 5 locations is kind of like the rosy story, but there's been a lot of locations that have opened and closed just due to issues outside of our control.
You mentioned 200 kids per location. What type of revenue streams there are, or what are the different ways how you make money and how you can make money?
It's a good question. We're very focused on our highest margin activity and what we do. There's a lot of opportunity in the youth education and youth enrichment space to do other things, but we have chosen to keep it tight with swim lessons. So we offer group and private swim lessons. That is it. So a group rate is $30. And basically, when you book with us, either a group or private, you're booking that day and time weekly. So if you book Thursday at 5 o'clock, that's your spot moving forward. To give you a frame of reference, the private lesson is 30 minutes. It's $60, so it's double the price. We're what I would call a boutique swim school, in that we do more private lessons than your average swim school. We also have lower group ratios than your average swim school. It's one of the things that sets us apart. It's a really good way to stand out quality wise, like with other franchises and other competitors. It's really a boutique experience, and we pride ourselves in the quality and the kids improving. So the way we do it, we keep our overhead low so our margins stay high, so we can afford to pay people more and we can afford to not pack the classes. A lot of the issue, if you actually build your own facility, you're spending so much money with your build out, there's not much left over to actually pay your instructors, and you need to jam the kids in the classes. So like at a minimum, a franchise swim school would probably be 4-to-1 on the ratio. Our first three levels are 3-to-1. And I know it probably doesn't sound like it, but that's actually a very big difference when you're dealing with kids that can't swim. That's a big difference for the ratio. And a lot of people, you're not really incentivized to do private lessons when you're in that model. Whereas we look at it as we do what's right for the kids. So we definitely charge for it. It's not cheap, but a lot of kids do better in that private environment, and our margins are what they are. So we're happy to offer it. But I would say about 35% of our business is actually private lessons. Whereas a normal swim school, it would definitely be less than 5%.
What is like? I have a 2.5-year-old kid. Okay, I decided. Okay, I would like to teach her to swim. The best way to do that is to hire you guys. So, what's the process, and for how long she will be there, and what happens afterwards?
Good
What I
question.
mean is, yeah, do you do like an upsell? Like, okay, you should maybe try and go to be a professional athlete or something like this. Because I remember when I started playing volleyball when I was young, I just went there because I wanted to play volleyball, but it took like almost 2 years to learn to play. But I fall in love with those 2 years, and I end up becoming like a almost professional volleyball player.
Yeah. So our philosophy is if the kids love it, they're going to do it for longer and want to do it. So we really encourage fun in the lesson while addressing the water safety side, because this is not like play around, sing songs. This is kids learning to be safe first and foremost, especially in an area like Florida where you're outside all year. There's so much water. So at 2.5 years old, kids can absolutely swim independently. So one thing, if you were coming in with a 2.5-year-old, I would go over the options. So kids under 3 in a group class, we keep with their parents, just because a lot of kids learn better when they're more comfortable that with parent or guardian in the water. That being said, there's definitely a gray area between 2 and 3. I have 3 kids myself. I have 2-year-old twins that are about to turn 3. They would probably do better without me in the water. So there is a gray area. So I would talk to you as a client and understand your child and what the best fit would be. So I might suggest private lessons. I might suggest parent and me based on what you tell me. And we also offer intensives. One thing I didn't talk about was I said, we book day and time. We also offer 2-week sessions, which is kind of like a crash course. And, at 2.5 years old, they might be swimming at the end of that. So that's kind of an upsell, but I really like to frame it where it's good for everybody because you want your child water safe and swimming as soon as possible. From that point on, a lot of people come to us with the only goal of being quote unquote water safe and getting their child to swim. But if the kid likes it, they want to continue and learn stroke. So it's kind of a natural upsell where they stay with the program. A lot of people think they're going to be with us 3 or 4 months, but they've been with us 3 years, not because their kids aren't learning how to swim, but they progress through the program. So we have a full on progression all the way up till swim team. We're not doing what my wife and I did in a former life. We have 2 great swim teams in the area that we refer a ton of children to, but they can be with us many, many years and kind of progress through the program, learn the proper strokes, get their technique in line. So when they do go to a team, their bodies are ready for it. They're safe. They're not going to get injured. So that's kind of how we do it. I wouldn't really look at it as an upsell per se, but if we do what's right for the child and do our job and make them love the water, they're going to want to stay with us.
Okay. Now going back to the business side of it, you mentioned that you bought a property. So
Yeah.
where did you get this idea, and do you see it when it comes to the future? You can maybe You're a swimming guy, but maybe you end up becoming a real estate guy.
Totally. I actually did commercial real estate for 5 years in a previous life in my 20s. So I do have a little bit of experience. I've been able to put together deals like that. I put together a deal for the swim school in California, kind of using that background. So my wife and I are just opportunistic, honestly. Like if we were really, we just look at situations, and if it makes financial sense, we do it. It's not part necessarily of an overall strategy. Like if we were really trying to juice the cash flow to sell the private equity, we could do that. This definitely set us back by putting the cash in this property, but we look at it as a great long-term investment and a really good way to take care of people. So backing up, I get a call from a realtor about a house with an indoor pool in it, and I'm like, they don't make houses with indoor pools in Florida. This isn't a thing. It's probably like a screened-in lanai with a cage. We have that in Florida. Then she sent me pictures, and sure enough, it was a house with an indoor pool. So the lady was selling it. This was at like the height of the market. And the lady was having some health problems, so she took it off the market. We were writing letters to her. Hey, we'd really like to buy your house, blah, blah, blah. So then inexplicably, like a year later, it comes online again. And the price was actually reduced, which was great. But we tied it up immediately, and then we figured out, like, we tried to figure out how are we going to operate here. So it is zone residential, which is the issue. But Florida actually has a home-based business law that was passed during COVID, where you can actually operate a home-based business as long as you meet certain criteria. Well, one of those criteria was the people that live there have to work there. So we actually lease it to our instructors, which is great because prices here have gotten to the point where it's not really realistic for a lot of younger people to be able to, definitely buy a home or even rent. So we're giving them a very sweetheart deal on rent to essentially take care of the property, live there. They teach there. We got it verified prior to buying it by 2 lawyers and the county themselves, as far as making sure we're able to do what we want to do. I mean, in retrospect, like, I would much rather have a commercial property where we could go, kind of all out. But at the same time, it's a really great investment. So we have a really good situation. We call it Swim House. So people love the name, people love the experience. We only do private lessons there. So that's a facility we don't do group, just because we want to be respectful of the neighborhood. But it's a really boutique facility that's kind of a one-of-a-kind experience that people really like. So we look at it as, okay, we have this asset, we're paying a mortgage, we're cash flowing monthly and paying it down over time. Just for our personal investment strategy, it works really well. It's not necessarily, again, like I said, there are different ways to do this business if we wanted to juice the revenue and really get acquired by PE. But for us, this is a good investment that makes sense over the long haul. And it really gets us into owning more real estate, which is definitely attractive to us.
And now, as it's been successful, have you been looking for another one to do a similar deal, ideally?
It's funny you asked that. There's actually, I constantly check the real estate sites for pools and, some schools being sold, but buildings with indoor pools, all of that, just because that really is the limitation to our business, is having the facility. And there's actually a pool that a building with a pool that came available, an aquatic physical therapist. There's actually been 2 of those. One is very close to us and a great setup indoor. It's just too much money. We're at the point, I don't know how it is where you're at, but we're still at the point where interest rates are high. People are clinging on to values from 2 years ago. So it just doesn't make sense financially right now. And that's why we haven't built too. We're looking at some other investments right now that are kind of on the periphery to add, because we definitely want to grow. But the next step for us on the swim school side is really to build, and we have not done that, just simply because we're at peak everything. We're at peak real estate cost, peak construction cost, and peak interest. It's really brutal out there as far as, having to put the money into your own facility. And we've kind of chosen to keep our margins high and kind of go different routes and explore other businesses.
I guess you consider yourself being like a smaller player on this market of franchises and swim school businesses.
Yeah. I mean, especially with what's happening in the last couple of years. I mean, there's been a real kind of entry by private equity and some major franchise brands. But yeah, I think I would consider us, a medium-sized swim school, but on the grand scheme of things, absolutely small compared to the bigger players for sure.
And when it comes to growing your business? Do you see yourself doing it organically or through M&A and maybe acquiring a similar size business, doing it together, or what is the goal for the next following
Yeah, we're
years?
in an interesting spot because I would absolutely, that's my preference actually through M&A. The problem is the deals are few and far between. So if you're, anything over $1 million EBITDA, you pretty much have three players that you're going to sell to, and it's pretty hard to get access. I mean, those deals don't even come to market. So the issue that we're having is we've grown I mentioned we grew through hosted sites, so partnering with gyms. That works when you have an avenue. You don't want to just open one, right? You want to, if you're going to do that, you want to open several at a time. And I've gotten to the point where, it's really not hard for me to do so, but I need to see the path. Over the last couple of years, other franchises have kind of gotten in there. So there's not really a path. I could open one or two, north of me right now, but we're really trying to reevaluate what's important to us. And I think we really want to do it in a way where we can control our own water. So I think it would be pretty easy for us to open like the two or three remaining hosted facilities north of us. But you really want to do it in a way where you can leverage your staff and your team. And we find the ones that are available are kind of far apart from what we already have. So we're taking a little bit of a pause on expansion from that route right now. But we'd really like to look at opportunities to grow in kind of a smaller boutique framework moving forward. So historically, when you build a pool, a lot of these pools cost $1 to $2 million to put in. You go into a shopping center, you dig a hole in the ground, your landlord kind of has you on the 10-year lease because they know you can't go anywhere. It's not just like a normal retail shop. So I think the future is going to be smaller build outs, more of a boutique style. And we're really looking at some above ground pool options right now. Where we can, put them in and kind of make any space our space. And if things happen and we need to move, we can take our pool with us. And there's some good stuff coming to market right now. But I really look at the future of the industry, and especially for us as smaller boutique model where you can go into basically any market. And I also think we would like to get more into the youth enrichment market as far as gymnastics, ninja training, things like that. I think one thing I've learned as a parent and a business owner over the last few years, parents want options for all their kids to go to one place at one time. And this is kind of a convenience driven model. Quality is definitely important, but parents will choose convenience first over quality. And I really think the future for us and as an industry is to be able to offer more things for different kids. So let's say you have a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, and an 8-year-old. Maybe the 8-year-old is kind of graduated from the lesson program. They need to have something to do. And that's where gymnastics comes along. That's where ninja comes along, things like that. So as far as, our growth, I think the boutique model, as far as above ground pools, is kind of a smaller footprint. I'm actually headed out tomorrow. We're probably going to be acquiring a pool fence franchise, actually like a safety pool fence around the pool. And I've really been, you might know more about this than I, but I've really been fascinated by the service industry, the service businesses, as far as growth and the ability to service clients in a mobile model, just because we've been so constricted by needing pools in the past, and that's kind of limited our growth. So we're looking at something where we can tie in our database, our clients, what we already have, and our community name, and really leverage that to basically go anywhere that needs it. So we have a huge territory that we've negotiated, and we're really excited about this opportunity to possibly get in that. And I don't look at it as veering from the mission. I look at it as kind of an add-on to a platform that we already have that will allow us to make more cash that we can then put in the swim schools, if that makes sense.
Yes, that's very interesting because you're in one specific niche and you'll see. I mean, you have those hosted sites, but then you have this one swim house. You probably see like some of the products you're using, like how often you do it or what type of services you need to use. So maybe there is indeed a business, like a vertical you can expand to.
Yeah, when I found out about it, it just kind of made sense to me, and it's somewhat in line with what we do as far as a mission, but not really as far as like the actual service provided. But we know there's a need for it, and it's really important to me just with water safety for kids. We always talk about getting away from the business side to the actual service side. We talk about layers of protection, where I'll be the first one to tell you, as a swim school owner, swim lessons aren't enough. I mean, you need to be constantly aware when your kids are around water. And barriers are a huge part of that as far as layers of protection. And alarms, pool fencing, things like that. Swim lessons are one piece of the puzzle. And a lot of it is just being aware and setting yourself up for success to protect your children. In Florida, it's a law that every home needs to have these removable pool fences. So it's kind of a combination of, my worlds as far as like the business side and the water safety side, where it's something I can really feel good about. And at the same time, I know it's a really viable, solid business. So I'm headed out, to talk to the founder tomorrow actually and check that out, but pretty excited about it.
Yeah, good luck. Good luck with this.
Thank you.
You mentioned private equity quite a few times. So swim schools and private equity, who are those people running those private equity firms? Are they ex-swimmers? Do they have some LPs who's actually Michael Phelps, or what have you seen? What have you heard?
Yeah, no, they're not. They're not ex-swimmers for the most part. There's a few of them. Like, it's really interesting actually because I had zero experience prior to 2 years ago with private equity, and I'm really fascinated by what they do, and I've learned a lot over the past 2 years as I talk to them, if they approach me. And it's really interesting because you have three main players in the industry. Then you have a lot of people on the periphery that want to get in. I've talked, personally, I'm not really interested in selling to one of the major players just because I have a lot more building to do. And I think it's a good option for people I think it's a great option for swim school owners looking to exit. And there's a lot of people that started swim schools 30 years ago that are of that age where they're retiring. And the major players that are currently in the industry are a great off ramp for them. Personally, I love what I'm doing, still relatively young, want to keep doing it for a while. So I would entertain private equity in the sense of being able to be funded to get a second bite of the apple in 5 to 7 years and really grow something, because we are capital constrained right now, for the reasons I've talked about. But it's really interesting because I've talked to a lot of people that are private equity firms and other peripheral industries like childcare, child services. Childcare is a big one. They all want to be in swim schools, but the problem is they all need to be at a certain level of 1 to 2 million EBITDA to get in. So as I have these conversations, a lot of the people that have approached me have stated, hey, you're our operator. We love you, but we need to have you as an add-on to a bigger platform. The problem is they're not going to get the platform buys because it's so dominated by the players that are currently in the industry. And this is such a relationship-based industry that I really doubt that the outsiders are going to be able to get in. You have your major players that really have a wrap on like who is in, who's going to sell. And like I said, these deals don't come to market. So it's been a really interesting process to learn about what they're looking for and learn about some of their success stories in other industries. And I think there's a lot of people that want to be in swim schools because they understand the value. They understand it's a business that isn't going away. It's really needed, but I really think it's going to be difficult for a lot of them to get in.
You mentioned relationship-based industry.
Yes.
Can you maybe elaborate a bit? Like, what do you mean? And any examples?
Well, it's a very small industry, and there's a few associations that everybody's a part of. So, and people talk, there has been kind of a divide between the private equity groups and the people, because you have to understand, up until recently, most people that started swim schools did so because they were amazing instructors who had a business that took off without them even really, not necessarily not trying, but it was so good that it just took off. So somebody would start in their backyard, in 1990 and have several hundred clients. And then over time, it necessitated building a pool, getting additional pools, and they have these large businesses today. But they're not really necessarily business people in a lot of cases. A lot of them have turned into business people and run quite good businesses. But the main thing is people started this out of a love for instruction. So I think people were very wary of the money coming in because that's a relatively recent phenomenon of probably like the last 5 to 7 years when people realize, hey, this is a real business that we can, consolidate, buy these at 3x and sell them for 5 to 6x. But people are slowly coming around to be more open to it as they get to the age where they're exiting. So it's been a really interesting thing to watch as it's become more accepted over the last few years, mainly because it's provided a really good off-ramp for people that are done and would like to retire and would like to kind of take their chips off the table, so to speak. Does that answer your question?
Yes, perfect. Perfect. And now next one, there are those private equity backed franchises like Big Blue, Emler, and Safe Splash. Maybe I missed some of them. So how does those businesses work, and uh, when the private equity got into this?
Yeah, so I know to address your question about are these people swimmers, Big Blue, the founder, actually is a swimmer. He was a very high level swimmer. They're interesting. So let me back up and talk about the different models because each one of those has a very different model that you talked about. So when you do this, you can either become a franchise and build, be independent and build, or do a hosted model or a combination thereof. Safe Splash does a really good job because they just want successful locations. So Safe Splash probably has a few hundred locations that operate out of gyms. They also build, they have franchises, they own corporate, they kind of do everything. So I think they do a pretty good job of just being open to making money. Whether that's a franchisor model, whether that's corporate owned. As far as I know, Imler is all corporate owned. They've done a really good job. I've been very impressed with their growth and their expansion. Greg, the CEO, got in at the right time. Um, and I think it's almost comical, like what he was able to acquire that for, and then based on what multiples were back then versus what they are now. But he's done a great job. I mean, I think he bought it with 7 or 8 locations, and they probably have 40 plus locations now, and they've expanded markets. Big Blue's a little different. In my mind, Big Blue's probably the hardest model because it's so big. Big Blue, to my knowledge, was founded on the idea of convenience and having 2 pools at every facility and huge envelopes of space. So they didn't want any parent to have to wait to, if they had 3 kids, kind of like what we talked about before, all 3 kids could get lessons at the same time. They had huge expansion plans, but I think they realized that model is only going to work in certain markets with a very, very dense population just because the overhead is so high. It's funny, the group I'm talking to now regarding the pool fence company, one of their guys actually was on a private equity in one of the private equity groups that was involved in Big Blue, and the numbers he was telling me about what they try to hit as far as their overhead was just insane. It's basically like 30 grand a month in rent and 30 grand a month in debt coverage. So you're talking like 60 grand a month right off the bat to essentially, you can't even call that breaking even because you have your labor costs and things like that. But that's a pretty big hole. And I can tell you that sort of model, you can't have that in a market like Sarasota, Florida. You can do it in places, like Chicago, where they're from. I think they do quite well there. But I think when you have that big of envelope and big of space requirement, there's only certain markets that you can be in. So I'm sure they do very well in the markets that they're in, but my approach would definitely be different. But that's kind of how I see those three players that you mentioned.
What are your maybe advantages and disadvantages compared to them, like other than money, other than access to capital?
Capital's a big one, but I mean, the beautiful thing about this industry is I think you can always succeed against a franchise or private equity. I think you can offer a unique experience, even if that's like an individual instructor. So when we started this conversation, I told you that we were around when it was just the YMCA and we were able to grow very quickly. Since then, we've had 2 franchises come into town. We've had Aqua Tots and Goldfish come into town. And, I was kind of worried at first. I never thought like it would destroy us, but obviously, if you have the choice between competition and no competition, I'd choose no competition. But the end result has really done nothing but help our business. I think that it's interesting because it gives people a point of comparison. So I think if you run a good shop and you keep your expenses in check and you have a good handle on your margins and know what it costs you, I think you can be very successful literally right next door to one of these major players. So using the example that I used before, if you're going to go head to head with somebody like a franchisee that builds a beautiful facility, well, you can not necessarily beat them because I think there's room for everybody. There's a lot of kids that need to learn how to swim. But if they're offering 4-to-1 group, you offer 3-to-1 group. Or if they're offering 4-to-1 group, you offer private lessons and have a different experience and you just charge more for it. So it's there's a lot of ways to win at this, and I think there's a lot of room for everybody. But what I've seen where people fail and where people struggle is they lose track of their overhead and they spend way too much on overhead. I think the overhead will kill you So we've had a very conscious effort from day one to be very cash flow positive, really pay attention to our margins, and not spend too much in our spaces.
Would you ever consider becoming a franchise, or you prefer to stay independent?
It's interesting. I think that I don't know if the world needs more swim school franchises right now, but I would do it in a way where I could capitalize people like myself that really don't have access to that. So, are you familiar with Chick-fil-A and their model? As far as basically what they'll do, they have franchisees, but Chick-fil-A essentially owns the real estate, develops it. The franchisee essentially gets a cut of everything that they generate, but the Chick-fil-A group gets a large percentage of that, but they front all the costs. So it's not your traditional franchise agreement. I would do something like that or more of a licensing deal where I could help people that are kind of in the aquatics industry run successful businesses, because a lot of people have the skill to teach, have the skill to coach, but don't necessarily have the business sense. And I think that's where we could really provide that. So as far as the traditional model, probably not, but I think there are some unique ways to do it and license both the technology and possibly the equipment later on, or essentially invest in somebody and essentially invest in an operator and grow that way.
And how do you think private equity involvement in swim schools is changing the overall industry landscape? What I mean in here is, do you see them investing in better coaches and better talent versus when there is an opportunity that they prefer to reinvest into a new building, new pool, and opening a new swim school in a new location?
Yeah, I think it's a positive thing overall. I think it's positive for owners. I think it really provides a good retirement option when an owner's is done. I think people are getting more money for their schools now that they've put decades into. So I think that's positive. I think anytime you have more aquatic options for kids, I think it's positive. I think it's bringing a professionalism to the industry. But I also think that for the reasons we talked about, I still think that there's plenty of room for independent operators to thrive. Just because when you have a situation like that, you have to hire, you can only pay so much when you're spending so much on the pool side. So I think the franchises have done a very good job with a client experience from the actual facility, but I still think there's a lot of room on the service side as far as the product, if that makes sense. Just because I think, in my experience in this industry, it all comes down to who you hire. And I think if you hire the right people, everything else gets taken care of. So I think that being able to pay higher wages is probably more important than anything as far as bells and whistles of the facility. So I think that's where there's always going to be an opportunity. I think the private equity is always going to be able to afford to open a facility and do well there. But I also think the independent provider will always have the capability to provide a very, very quality product, if that makes sense. So at the end of the day, I think more money in the industry is really just good for kids, and more options are good for kids. And I think that more options provides a point of comparison where people can really choose the path that works for them and choose the provider that works for them.
If and how common it is in swim school business that one school, someone comes to you and they pretty much pay more for your coach than you do, and then the coach leaves and the kids will follow this coach. How common it is, and if it is?
Not really. I mean, most swim school owner, or most, like, a franchise swim school might not even like list the name of their coach. So they don't even know, like, if they were to leave, like, nobody would know where they went, essentially. So we've definitely gotten people from other swim schools, just because, like I said, we pay more, we try to provide a really good environment, we try to provide more flexibility in their teaching. But on the lesson side, it's not very common. On the club side and competitive side, it's very common. Like, if a coach leaves, their swimmers are following them, just because it's a more intimate experience and people are more serious at that point because that's their sport they've dedicated themselves to. But from our business side, maybe a little bit, but not too much.
Maybe it's a stupid question, but in Florida, there's a lot of water. But how about in New York, for example? There is a lot of capital, a lot of rich parents with a lot of kids, but not so much water. I don't know how many pools there, but what about the stories like, let's say there's this one location and it does like crazy numbers or something, or how have they solved this there, because it's not too much water?
Yeah, there's actually a thriving swim school scene in New York. And what happens is when these buildings are built, like these luxury apartments with indoor pools, whenever you build a pool, you find that it doesn't get a lot of use. So a lot of these landlords have actually leased their facilities out to swim schools that run them, and their tenants can, use them during certain hours. But a lot of swim schools operate in these New York apartment buildings. So there's actually a thriving scene, and just costs being what they are, the costs are double. I mean, if it's $30 for a swim lesson in Sarasota, Florida, it's easily $60, $70, something like that, in New York. And what the New York schools do, it's very interesting because everybody leaves the city in the summer. So they all go out to the Hamptons. And what a lot of schools do will actually lease houses in the Hamptons, and they will send their instructors to various homes. And at that point, you're talking 300, 350 an hour for swim instruction. And a lot of these, I mean, you're basically dealing with people where price isn't necessarily that much of a concern, but it's really interesting how different markets react, because I actually think it's pretty difficult to operate swim schools in Florida. Florida isn't quite the market you would think it is, just because there's a lot of independent backyard instructors that can go to people's homes or have their own pool. But I have friends that operate in the Midwest and like St. Louis, where they thrive in the winter because there's nothing else to do. So using my 6-year-old as an example, he's deep into his soccer season right now. He can play outside all year round. If you're in St. Louis, Missouri, if you're in Chicago, you're not playing on soccer outside in January or February. So that leaves very limited options for you to do. So I know some people in the Midwest that do great. And I would argue that it's actually, in a lot of cases, difficult in places like Florida and California, because there are so many options and the weather is so good. I mean, we're spoiled with how good the weather is, but it's kind of difficult in a business like this. So a lot of people don't realize that. But even places like New York, they're not necessarily building the pools for the dedicated use of a swim school, but the pools do exist, and there is a thriving swim school scene in New York.
Okay. What about now going back to the business side of growing the business, managing the day to day? What technologies are you using, and how do you see the game is changing there? Maybe there is a very typical CRM you're using, or if there isn't, maybe you could build one or buy one. Or what about the technology and automation?
It's a really good question, and I really get frustrated with swim school technology because I feel like it's about a decade behind. So we use what's called a class management software to keep all the classes in line. It does very well with what it does, but it doesn't talk to other apps. I use automation, company called Go High Level, as far as like text-based automation. So we really went to text first as far as communicating with clients. So I've set up all my automations. When somebody fills out a form, they get emailed, they get texted, and we start a conversation via text. We're absolutely ready to talk to them on the phone if they need that, but we find a lot of people don't want to talk on the phone. They would rather text. Not so much, email, yes, but mainly text. So I look at it as a text first business, and that's really enabled us to do what we do. I think the magic in what we do and why our margins are so good is because we're very efficient on the back end with what we use. The problem is all of the tools that we use don't connect with our class management software, so it is a little bit cumbersome. I think that's changing. There have been some new players that have come along that I think will do great things on the technology side. The problem is, as the owner, I'm not necessarily in the weeds like, my director of operations or my wife is, as far as the class management. So when I say, hey, we should really look at this software because it has an API that would connect to our other software, they look at me like, I'm an alien, because they don't want to change what they've been working in the last 5 years. And they're the ones that have to feel the brunt of that. So I have to respect that, just because it's the type of thing, when you have all of your data on one platform, your staff, your clients, everyone's used to working in this one software. And like all their payment methods are stored there. It is a beast to change. And I think that's why a lot of these players haven't necessarily changed with the times, because they kind of don't have to, because they know how much of a pain it is to switch. So I see that getting better, but that's kind of the state we're in now. We're just coming from other industries, having a background in digital marketing. Right away, I recognize that the swim school industry is very far behind from a technology perspective.
You mentioned digital marketing. What about the marketing? What about the sales, branding, having a strong brand? How much can you do there? How much are you doing already? And how much do you see to have this like a advantage over the guys who started the business 30 years ago?
Yeah, there's not much of that in my market, honestly, just because it is a relatively newish market. We're one of the most experienced players. Just we came in before the franchises. So there's not really the 30-year-old competitors that are still using the fax machine, so to speak. So we don't really have that. But really, in this business, moms are our biggest, moms will make or break you as far as word of mouth. So we just try to keep the quality high. That's been my business philosophy from day one is if we hire the right people and have a good product, everything else will take care of itself. And obviously, there are other things you need to deal with along the way, but that is number one. Social media marketing, as far as like Instagram, Facebook, that's kind of my background. But word of mouth is by far our number one referral. I've found that you can't really, there are certain times of year that we just know people are looking for swim lessons. I found you can't really use advertising to get out of a slump per se, or really boost it when it's not the market. Like for right now, example, we're headed into Thanksgiving, Christmas is coming up. People aren't really looking for swim lessons right now, but I know there's going to be a huge surge in January. I know there's going to be another one in March. I know there's going to be another one after spring break in April. Then it's going to be up until August. It's going to decline when people go back to school. Once they get back into school, it's going to go up again. So I like to use Facebook and Instagram to pour gasoline on the fire when I know people are looking for swim lessons. And then the Google AdWords is kind of the background that's always running, because that's an intent-based search where people are actively looking for swim lessons. So we want that, all the time. But I've learned over the years, I can't really force it on Facebook and Instagram. I'm really good. I've opened up several new locations now. So I'm really good at running like a grand opening special and getting leads using Facebook and Instagram lead ads for that. But I've definitely backed off a little bit over the years, just because at this point in Sarasota, people kind of know who we are. I've done a lot more in Swim Academy in Palm Harbor just because we don't have the same reputation up there. But it's been really interesting just to see the trends over the years and really understand where your money is actually going and what's generating an ROI. We're at the point right now where, community activities, and not even activities, but sponsoring schools. We're sponsoring my 6-year-old school with a big banner on a main thoroughfare in Sarasota. Just stuff like that, being part of the community is kind of where we're at now. But it definitely started on that digital side, understanding what works and what doesn't.
It's November 2024. What about if we talk again in November 2029? What do you think is going on? What does Josh Scott do? Has he sold the business to private equity, or he's still growing the business, or what do you think is going on?
It's a great question. I think by then I will have a pool fence conglomerate that's all through the Tampa Bay area and doing great money on that. But ultimately, what I would like to do is I would like to have 3 to 5 locations that I own. I own the real estate, and then I sell the business. So I think, that's the way I approach it. The real estate, as far as selling to private equity, doesn't hold a lot of value for the multiple that you can sell. But I would really like to own the real estate to have a tenant long-term, have a specialty property that I know isn't going anywhere. But that's kind of my retirement plan. I would love to own, 3 to 5 of these. Conversely, I would also be open to, if I basically put it like this, if we keep going the way we're doing, we're going to keep reinvesting profits. And that would be my plan, is to own 3 to 5 of these and then keep the real estate, sell the business. I would also be very excited to partner with somebody that wants to be in the swim school space, that really wants to pour gasoline on the fire, that understands we know the model and knows that we can get this to, multiple millions of dollars in EBITDA if they were willing to build the right facilities. So we're kind of at the point where, we have a family and we have to look at the cash flow coming in and first and foremost take care of the family. But we've built it to a point where we have a lot of options to be able to reinvest in other businesses. But we have to be very careful about how we deploy that money if we're going to open and build a facility and buy another property. So those are kind of my two options: keep growing organically, very happy doing that. But if we were able to find the right partner to kind of accelerate growth, that would really be fun to kind of play at that bigger level, using my relationships within the community, but also being able to open these schools throughout the Southwest or Southeast.
I know you're this family and lifestyle guy because some time ago I posted that the 33% IRR might be that important when you don't see your kids, and
Yeah.
you posted you commented, and from there I decided to reach out and invited you to the podcast. So my question to you. How has entrepreneurship and building your swim school holding company changed your life and changed your family life?
I am so incredibly grateful about the time that I get to spend with my kids. I can always take them to school. I can always pick them up from school. I don't really, you know, I don't really travel much, to be honest with you. Like we kind of live in our bubble, but I'm always there at my son's sports practices, games. I don't miss any of that. So that's number one. And I'm just really thankful for that. My dad worked a corporate job for 30 years with Chevron, and it was a good, it took care of our family. They treated him well, but it was just a different vibe. And I didn't really know entrepreneurship was something I could do because I never really had that example in my life, but I never really felt right at a job, at a quote unquote job per se. So for me, it's a lot of risk, it's a lot of stress, but now that we've kind of built up the stability, I'm just very, very grateful that we can live the life that we can on our terms, where we're able to keep growing, but do it in a way where it doesn't sacrifice anything with our family. Yeah, I forgot that was actually how we kind of came into contact when I posted that, but I thought that really like hit me because I've noticed a lot of my peers and a lot of people I know don't have that flexibility. And it's just time you can never get back. You have a young kid, you know how it is. It's things are even changing. When my 6-year-old is 10, it's going to be different than it is now. So I'm really trying to be present during these years of their lives. And I'm very grateful that we're able to do that, both my wife and I, due to our business.
This post went quite viral because people reached out, said that they have some friends who are in this league of this 33% IRR and running big funds and very busy, and they sent this post to their friends, and the friends responded that at that day it got them thinking, and some of them took their kids to the office that day. So it's
Good. Yeah.
it worked. It worked.
It's one of those things where like everything you do, you're definitely torn as somebody that cares about your family and wants to be successful, because everything that I'm sure you do is for them, just like everything I do is for my family. But there's a balance of like making the money and being present. So I don't know. I try to negotiate that well, but I mean, the money is definitely important because that provides the lifestyle. So I think people are just trying to do their best, but I think it's easy to lose sight of that. And I just think the years when your kids are young, you're just never going to get those back. So I totally understand the other perspective and people doing that to earn money for their family. But I do think it's a difficult balance, but I think it all comes from a good place.
Okay, Josh, let's wrap up with the famous five. How old are you?
41 years old.
Favorite book?
Yeah, if I'm going nonfiction, I would probably say Psycho-Cybernetics. And then if we were going fiction, I like an author named Greg Iles, and I also like Jack Carr. He was the ex-Navy SEAL who did the Terminal List. I'm up to date. I think he's written like 6 or 7 books. So those are my two favorite fiction authors.
What car do you drive?
I'm laughing at this because I knew you were going to ask that, but I'm not really a car guy, but I drive a VW Atlas Cross Sport, which I love. It's a midsize SUV, looks really sporty, handles great, but I'm not really a car guy. And we joke around about this with my wife. My wife is the one that gets the Escalade. So my wife drives an Escalade. We joke because we have the 3 boys, so we needed like the space because they're all really big boys. But that was definitely a point of contention about, do you really need the Escalade versus something that's not quite an Escalade? So my wife gets the Escalade, but I have the VW Atlas Cross Sport.
Okay. What's the best investment advice you've ever got?
So I kind of learned my investment advice like as an adult, but I think really just investing in yourself and betting on yourself is probably the best that I've received.
And last one, where can people find you?
Twitter, X, it's where we met, Swim School Josh. I don't really post a ton there. I've been more of a lurker, but just like really interested in the SMB private equity community. But definitely will be developing more of a personal brand in 2025 and sharing stories. And I'm finding there's actually some interest in what I do, which is flattering. And I really like having these conversations and meeting people like yourself. So I will be posting more in the coming years and looking forward to meeting like-minded people.
Okay. Again, thanks a lot for doing this. Such an interesting niche, and now I have so much better overview of what is going on. And next time I'm taking my kid to a swimming lessons, I'm gonna have a bunch of questions
Yeah,
for those guys on how they're
yeah,
planning to do this.
absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yes, thanks a lot, and have a good one, Josh.
Take care.